Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Great to have you here. If you're watching right now live, it's Tuesday at April 16th. So I'd love to hear from you if you have any comments or questions or thoughts, or if you want to get something off your chest. The call-in number is 640-3091. That's 640-3091. We are in the middle of budget season, so there are lots of things going on, and it's a pretty exciting time. Before I do that, though, well, easier said than done. So I want to mention the fact that this is Holy Week, and so coming up this weekend is Good Friday, and those of us who are Catholic observe Good Friday by abstaining from meat and observing in other ways. So we're not here to do theology. So, but in any case, that's Good Friday, and then of course we have Easter Saturday night for our vigils, and then Easter Sunday. And considering the big news from yesterday was, of course, the fire at the church, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, and the news today, if you're watching live, of course, you will have heard already today that a substantial part of the building was saved, and so that's a wonderful thing. I thought it was very interesting, and I'm still mulling over the idea of that here we are, 3,000 miles away from that event, and yet it affected people quite deeply. I know it affected me. I very luckily in my life had the advantage of having been there and visited that beautiful facility. But there was something else going on. I think that even for non-Catholics, I think that just for sort of as a symbol of world civilization and history, it has struck me that how strange it is to be living in the United States of America, distant in miles for sure, but given a lot of the history of Notre Dame Cathedral, sort of distant in time from a lot of it as well, and yet it strikes a chord. And without being preachy, because I'm going to do a little bit of this right here, I think, but I think it's important. To me, what I get from it is this sense of solidarity beyond borders, and things that the things that unite us are far greater than the things that divide us. And it reminded me of the things that happened while there's no level of comparison, because they're entirely different things and of a much different order of seriousness. And despite the tragedy, or now all perhaps even the almost tragedy of the Cathedral of Notre Dame being burnt, it pales into insignificance compared to the 9/11 tragedy. But I only bring up the 9/11 tragedy, just that reaction of this was a New York event. But it wasn't a New York event. It was a world event, and people all over the world, everywhere, even into the most remote places in the Pacific Islands, to the furthest reaches of Asia, to the tip of South America, people worldwide were shocked at the events of 9/11, that such an atrocity could be meted out to innocent people going about their work. And so, while 9/11 was a cathartic moment for the United States, which I believe in our lives and in our psychology and in our body politic, we're still dealing with the aftermath of that. There's the similarity is this idea that the world is now a smaller place than it used to be because of interconnectedness and real-time communications and things. So anyway, that was just my thought on that. I don't even know why I'm sharing that with you and why you would be interested in knowing how I feel about it, but there you go. I do want to mention, though, it is Holy Week, and it is at times the end of the Lenten season, and a lot of these traditions and practices are misunderstood, I think. And we're here to talk about education, and I will get on to that. But I do want to say that I think they're misunderstood, and people have a notion about what Lent is, and oftentimes it's miscued, I think, and misconstrued in its meaning. And of course, it is the preparation for what is the highest point of the Christian year. Some people think about it as Christmas, as celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, but actually none of that makes sense without the resurrection, and therefore that's what we, as Catholics in particular and Christians more generally, celebrate Easter. And I just wanted to share with you that I know that there are many people today who are not in the habit of going to church on a Sunday or a Saturday evening or on the Sabbath. And I recognize that many people are secular or agnostic or atheist or and many other religions, and I'm very cognizant of that. But for those of us who are Christian, and particularly those of us who are Catholic, this is a wonderful time of the year to celebrate one's Catholicism. And I just want to share with you, the church that I attend is the Cathedral Parish of St. Joseph's on the corner of Pine and Lowell Streets in Manchester. And that's the Cathedral Parish of the Diocese of Manchester, which is the state of New Hampshire. And so that's where the bishop, the Catholic Bishop of Manchester, Bishop Labashi, will be presiding over the various ceremonies, etc. And I just want to share with you, if over the next few days I brought the calendar with me just to remind you, if you were interested, that there is a in the chapel, which is on Lowell Street at 7:30 on Wednesday evening. There's the office of Tenebrae, but then starting on Holy Thursday is the period of extensive prayer and observation. So there's morning prayer in the chapel at 9 a.m. if you were interested, and again on Thursday at 7 p.m. in the cathedral. On Good Friday, morning prayers at 9 a.m. and then in the cathedral at 3 p.m. Followed on Friday evening with the Stations of the Cross at 6 p.m., which follows the passion of Jesus and his carrying of the cross, and culminating with the crucifixion. And then on Saturday there's morning prayer at 9 a.m. But on Saturday evening, the Easter Vigil is on at the cathedral on Saturday evening at 8 p.m. And if you want to attend a service that is majestic and prayerful and usually wonderfully executed, with the diocesan choir, the cathedral choirs, it's a wonderful a couple of hours, culminating in a mass celebrating the resurrection. That's on Holy Saturday night, this coming Saturday night, April 20th at 8 p.m. And then, of course, on Sunday, there's the 8:30 Mass on Sunday morning, and then concelebrated Mass at 10:30, which is the High Mass and the big Mass of the year, 10:30 on Sunday. So I share this with you, not that I'm into evangelizing and seeking to inflict my view on others, but I'm of the opinion that there are many people who would like to avail themselves, who aren't always at church or don't often go, and I thought it was an opportunity to put before you that this would be a wonderful time, and you'd certainly be welcome, I know, at any of the churches in Manchester, but certainly at the Cathedral of St. Joseph on the corner of Hine and Lowell Streets. I don't usually have a lot of different topics, but there's a bunch of things going on. So Well, I think about there's sort of a continuum here between Easter, and then we talked about Notre Dame and the burning of Notre Dame Church, and now the good news about many things were saved from it, etc. But there's a kind of a segue into the fact that in the budget as proposed by Dr. Vargas, it is proposed to reintroduce French into our middle schools, and so Before everybody gets too excited, when Spanish was reintroduced last year, it was introduced at a very low level. So at least Spanish is available to some kids in each of our 4 middle schools, but not to everybody. As I recall, there are 2 Spanish teachers who spent half time in each of 2 schools, in 2 of each of the 4 schools. And so if everybody in the school wanted to do Spanish, they couldn't possibly do it. And I believe we're doing the same thing with French, but I've forgotten actually the details of it. But I'm thrilled to see that we are at least contemplating reintroducing French into our middle schools. So despite all our shortcomings and all our shortfalls and the squeeze on our budgets, I commend Dr. Vargas hugely, and I commend the school board for having, some of them a little reluctantly perhaps, but having supported sending the budget, the required budget, for approval by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And I really hope that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen do fund the schools. And I think it was a poor day in Manchester when French was when foreign languages were eliminated from our middle schools. It was a sad day. I remember at the time thinking that there is still a large French community, and certainly a huge community of people who have French ancestors who live in not just Manchester but all the surrounding towns. One only has to look at the last names on businesses and school lists, etc., to see the number of French families who are in the neighbourhood. My wife is partially French Canadian, and so therefore my kids are, and it always surprised me that French was eliminated as a language throughout the school district. And it seemed to me that there should have been a greater outcry. I'm thrilled with the idea that we're contemplating bringing it back. I believe it never should have been eliminated. I think lots of kids in Manchester have still got uncles and aunts and grannies and granddads who are fully French. And I was thinking about this as I drove by the French bookstore on the corner of, I think it's on the corner of Orange and Elm Street, just 1 block back. But anyway, so I'm thrilled to see that. I hope that happens. Now, Mayor Craig has touted the fact as she begins her run for mayor. She has touted the fact that she is allowing the largest increase for our public schools since 2006, I think she says. And I commend the mayor for, in her budget, allocating the money that she's allocating, but it's still not fully funding the request that came from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, not the tax cap request, but the additional request. So it goes some way towards it. But if the budget as proposed by Mayor Craig is passed, some of the things that either that we have now or that are proposed under that budget will have to be eliminated or reduced. And so I'm hoping that there are some aldermen who are busy sharpening their pencils and proposing a budget that will fully fund the Manchester School District. We're coming to the end of the reign of our superintendent, Dr. Vargas, and we'll be very sorry to see him go. I'm waiting to see what if there's an update. We haven't had one yet on the acquiring of a new superintendent. So I know that the school board has met on the topic and talked about what a contract might look like, etc. So I'm hopeful that that process is going on, but we'll leave it where it is for tonight. Of course, we have a couple of things on the date side. I just want to say about tonight, by the way. There's a fundraiser for Bakersville PTG, Parent Teacher Group, that's going on. If you're watching this and you intend to go out and get a bite to eat tonight somewhere, or if you didn't intend to do it, you might do now. If you go to Applebee's over on Second Street from now until 9 p.m. And you get something to eat, then if you name Bakersville, then a portion of your money will go towards Bakersville School. So a wonderful school. People trying hard to meet the needs of kids in any way they can. So if you want to put your hand in your pocket and get something to eat at the same time, tonight would be a good time to do that. Upcoming, today is the 16th, so Thursday, at 4:30 p.m. The superintendent will be at Southside Middle School at 4:30 for about an hour for a meet and greet with the superintendent. If you have things you would like to discuss with him, and that will be followed the following morning. That's the 19th at Friday morning at 7:30. He'll be at Wilson Street School. So those are a couple of opportunities to visit with the superintendent over the next few days. Also, of course, school vacation is next week, and so hopefully everybody will stay safe and have some time off from their rigorous studies and come back refreshed and ready to finish off the year. With regard to the budget, I think it's interesting that we have at the state budget side, while we have people here looking to who think that when we try to find an additional $1 million to do something, it's as though it's like a shocking amount of money to some people. But when you contrast, when I look at I was looking at the news today, and some of the things that came up were the news that broke today, at least broke to me today. It was on Union Leader that Catholic Medical Centre is proposing a 220,000 square foot addition or development over on the west side, which is a great thing. It's a great thing for the school district too, since there's collaboration between the school district and CMC today, and that program is developing, and CMC has stepped up to the plate, and so you will see synergies between CMC and particularly West High School, but the idea that the CMC would propose to spend something between $125 million and $175 million on expanding its footprint on the west side of Manchester and adding 220,000 square feet. The drawings of the facility, which will be coming before the zoning board or the planning board in May, it's going to have an incredible impact on that junction on Granite Street. I was over there looking at the Rite Aid store, and with all due respects to Rite Aid, the lot there is pretty embarrassing, and frankly, if you ever go to look as you come down the street, if you go to have a look at the garbage and trash that is thrown and strewn in the trees and bushes all along the back, behind the back of Rite Aid, which is backed onto a public park area. It's shocking to me that I think people there should complain to the owners of that lot and have it cleaned up. Obviously, with the plastic bottles and garbage that have been left there forever, they didn't get there yesterday or the day before. And I think as city community members, property owners, especially commercial property owners with leasing property like Rite Aid, I think Rite Aid Corporation themselves should be embarrassed to be in a lot that's so badly maintained, albeit a little out of sight. And St Mary's Bank, La Caisse Populaire Saint Marie, I think doesn't get off exactly unscathed either, because if you go over tonight and you look where that new headquarters is in the area back from it. Where the drive-in and through is, there's litter and garbage scattered around there, and I think I'm fairly confident in saying that it's not actually St Mary's Bank property. It's 20 feet from it, but if it was next to my house, I would ask something to be done about it. But anyway, this proposal to build a up to $175 million development of 220,000 square feet on the west side, as you drive across the Notre Dame Bridge now, and you take a left and you look at it heading westwards, and you look at it, you're going to have a whole new building right there, running from next to the St. Mary's Bank. St. Mary's Bank over to as far as CMC, and the Rite Aid will be incorporated but moved out closer to the street, and it's just wonderful to see these developments going on in Manchester. And when I think about that and the building that is now nearing completion, that Southern New Hampshire University is building the parking garage and putting what will eventually be 1,800 or maybe close to even 2,000, but 1,800 employees just in that area right by the ballpark. And you add to that the minimum of 400 jobs, up to 800 jobs being, which are high quality, high tech jobs, coming into BAE Systems down on the south side of the city. And we could go on, but there was a time when the city was very excited about the fact that Market Basket was coming into town, and I remember politicians in our city touting the fact that their primary business development effort was, look at what we're doing with Star Market. And I'm very happy with the Star Market coming, but look at the contrast in 4 or 5 years between the city of Manchester celebrating something like that to the kind of developments we're talking about today. And there are numerous others going on, ladies and gentlemen. There's on Elm Street, there's the Racks Club being transformed into apartments and retail. There's the Ted Hebert building. We could go on. There's on the South Elm Street, there's demolition going on right now. For more development there. So it's an exciting time in Manchester. And I bring that up only to contrast it with our recalcitrant school board and board of mayor and aldermen, who've got 1 foot in the 19th century, 3/4 of a foot in the 20th century, and a couple of toes in the 21st century. And they're being dragged screaming reluctantly to a point where they recognize that this is an exciting city that's growing, and they I've used the language that they keep their boot on the neck of the school system, which itself is the major drawback, thing that's drawing back the city from fully releasing itself and its sense of excitement around the city, etc. In so many ways. In community activity, in organizations, and in social opportunities, in businesses, and the excitement of new businesses opening from potteries and art facilities, and the bookery in Elm Street, and all the exciting things going on. Just today, we had an announcement that's actually happening tonight. There's a Board of Mayor and Alderman meeting on tonight. There's a public comment session at 7 o'clock, and then there's the board meeting is on at 7:30. And it's reported at that meeting tonight, there's going to be, let me see if I can find them right here. It's going to be an IBOT from Dean Kamen's DECA. And I hope I kept it open here. maybe I didn't, but I didn't right now. But anyway, so I have too many screens open, I guess. In any case, there's a proposal by FedEx to use a 200-pound like square robot. It's on today's Union Leader. That will deliver packages, and it's going to begin as a pilot program. The iBot was developed by DECA, Dean Kamen's DECA, here in Manchester. This is a national event because it's proposed to roll it out in Memphis, Tennessee, and in Plano, Texas, which is the headquarters of FedEx, and this robot will, you can read on today's Union Leader or go online and read it, or you'll see it after tonight's meeting, that this robot will deliver packages on behalf of FedEx. Now, besides Memphis, Tennessee and Plano, Texas, if the Board of Mayor and Aldermen agree tonight, and it's shocking to have to say if they agree, but I presume they will, if they agree, then the city of Manchester would be the third site in the United States that would have a pilot program of 6 months or so where this robot would be used. And I don't like to be parochial in my thinking, and I recognize it's a big world out there, but to have Manchester included as a place where such a pilot program is starting puts a huge stamp of approval and recognition on the city of Manchester as a place that's exciting and growing and technology savvy and engineering savvy a place. It makes it attractive for people to want to come and to work and to stay here, and attractive for people to live here. So, without doing the work of the Manchester Advertising Authority, if there was such a thing, or the Manchester Development Authority, it's clear that there are exciting things happening in our city. And so in the light of that, to have people having their arms wrapped around the tax cap and not allowing the city to even use the revenues that the increased revenues we might have. The last number of years, this year again, we'll have close to $2 million over budget in car registrations. And there's no reason, it makes no sense in a growing city like Manchester, in an exciting city like Manchester, in a city with the needs that Manchester has, for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen not to be able to spend that additional money, but simply reduce the tax level because we've got a tax cap that doesn't allow it to happen. We're in this ridiculous circumstance where if there was a sudden windfall in the city and we were to develop $5 million more in whatever revenues, that the city wouldn't be able to avail itself of that additional spending. And we'd have to go back and continually go back to our department heads and ask them to cut and to cut and to cut, or at least to maintain services at current levels of spending, which means a cut in real time. So the contrast, ladies and gentlemen, between what's going on in our city, the excitement in our city, and the growth of business in our city, and the growth of opportunity in our city, and the sense of excitement that many people in this city have, and contrast that with the naysayers and those who want to hold us back, I think it's becoming starker and starker all the time. And I think we're going to see that clearly defined in upcoming elections. And so maybe we'll get into that later. But it's anybody ask. No, it isn't any. It isn't any surprise to anybody in this city if you're sitting around your kitchen table and you're talking about these matters, or if you have a friend who drops in who's on their way, home from Derry, or on their way down from Concord, or over from the seacoast, or wherever it might be, or ask any realtor or one of your neighbours. And you don't have to listen to Jim O'Connell. You don't have to believe it from me. It's everybody knows that the thing that stops families from moving into the city of Manchester is our schools. They are the lowest funded schools in the state. They've got the highest pupil-teacher ratios in the state. People know that we put less adults in front of kids than anybody else. They know it, and they've already said no. The surrounding towns voted with their feet. Despite what our previous mayor said, they shouted loud and clear. I've quoted many times that when Candia, after decades and decades of sending their kids to the city of Manchester, when we continued to cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, they went to a vote, and 93% of people in Candia said, we're getting out, we're going someplace else. So only a Luddite, only a person with their head in the sand, only an ideologue, somebody who's wrapped tightly to some kind of ultra-libertarian economic theory would stand on the piece of ground that says that that's not true and that something else is going on, because it's clear. It's just a ridiculous argument. Ask the most conservative realtor in the city of Manchester or in the surrounding towns. There are 300 realtors or so on the books of Keller Williams and the Bedford-Manchester line over by the Manchester Country Club. I think it's 300 on the books. There might be 150 or 200 active. You can ask any one of them, and they will tell you what you already know, that the city of Manchester has a problem with attracting families because people do not want to come to Manchester because of the school system. Now, there are always some other things. In recent years, we had the opiate crisis. It's been followed by a homelessness issue, which some have tried to make a Manchester issue, but it's actually a nationwide issue. Manchester is in a lot better off position than many other cities are with regard to handling and homelessness. And I heard some people, a couple of aldermen and a former state House member talking these matters recently, and they quoted something about, we should look at what other cities have done, and, how come you don't see this in places? And they named a list of cities. And because they named a list of cities, I actually, because maybe I'm strange that way, I went online and did a little bit of research to look at what the homelessness problem and what the panhandling problem might look like in the cities that they named. These are members of our current Board of Mayor and Aldermen. I don't mind discussing with them, and they're perfectly entitled to their views that they think that Manchester's gone to hell in a handbasket. That's fine. When they quote facts that are actually false, that don't have any basis in truth other than their own mindset and what they think, which they do all the time, it bugs the out of me. So I looked, and they mentioned places like Worcester, and they mentioned, of all places, they mentioned Hartford, Connecticut. I had some business in Hartford, Connecticut this year, and it's not that Hartford's the worst place in the world, but if you think, panhandling and homelessness doesn't exist in Hartford, then just go, while you're watching me, go Google it and have a look. But they mentioned numerous cities like this and what was happening. Somebody mentioned, I think one of them mentioned Nashville, Tennessee. And I did a Google on Nashville, Tennessee and panhandling and homelessness. And, the 7 or 8 people that we have on Elm Street, albeit unsightly and something that should be dealt with. I'm not ignoring it, but to pretend that it is somehow, that we are in a particularly bad position compared to others, I think it's misleading. It's false advertising. When I hear these people talk about Manchester that way, it bugs me, because it is not true that our problem with homelessness or vagrancy or loitering or panhandling, while I admit problematic and does need to be dealt with, is not worse than it is in other places. You can go up to Rochester, you go to Dover, go to Portsmouth, go to Nashua, go to even places like Milford, and you don't have to go to centres of larger cities in the state, and you'll find people standing on street corners with pieces of brown cardboard with anything will help, and God bless you, please give me something. So statistically, anecdotally, Manchester is not worse, and certainly when you look at the problem that other cities around the New England region are facing, it's not worse. What is worse, and what statistics prove to us and what we scientifically know, is that we have the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire. And these very same politicians in City Hall who want to talk up that problem refuse to do something that's within their power, which is to actually fund our school at a tiny bit better than the worst in the state. It's unacceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable to you, ladies and gentlemen. And that brings me to numerous other things, but we just strike off some of these things here while we. So we have a state budget, and I'm reminded of conversations that I've had with people who say to me, it's sort of like a pox in all their houses. It doesn't matter who you vote for, they're all the same. One is slightly better than the other, but in the end, what's any of them going to do for us? And I have one very good friend who often says to me, and he's a good guy, and I understand where he's coming from, because I think he's jaded, worn out by arguing and fighting for Manchester schools and being defeated at every turn. But if you look at the budget as proposed in Concord, there is a stark contrast between the existing budget, the budget that Governor Sununu supports, and the budgets that have been passed by the House and Senate. And there's a real effect on Manchester here, because under the numbers, under the budget that's been proposed by the majority of members in the House and Senate, I wrote down a couple of numbers. The funding, this is the state funding for education for the city of Manchester would improve this year. The city of Manchester would get an extra 3.5 or 3,568,000 and some dollars. And in the second year, the increase would be $16,342,000. We would go from $81.6 million to $93 million in the second year. So $16 million. This is very easy stuff to understand. That $16 million is per annum. It's not 1 year. It's every year, and that money could, if the current budget was passed, it has been passed by the House and Senate, it's likely to receive a veto from Governor Sununu, and so you have a stark contrast when you come to voting the next time if you pay attention to this stuff. Because if the budget as proposed in the House and Senate were passed, then $16 million, at a minimum $16 million, would come to the city of Manchester for schools. $1 million is about 20 teachers, by the way. Even if you spent all of this on teachers, you'd have enough money to employ 320 new teachers in Manchester and pay for them every year. Can you imagine that? Let's not get into hyperbole, but that's the kind of difference it would make, and it would mean that your property taxes and mine could be reduced. And we certainly wouldn't be looking at funding a school system. We wouldn't, with the same numbers as have been planned, we wouldn't have the city of Berlin closing down its last elementary school. The change is coming, ladies and gentlemen, because when the day comes when the last of the people shouting for closure. I mean, we've had people here in Manchester. We had an alderman in Manchester who, like many before him, and I don't want to make this personal, I'm not going to name him, and he can defend himself in his own good time, but as he departed the city and left to take his wife and kids and move to a nearby town, he had what I think was the audacity to discuss the closure of Central High School and how we should close Central High School. How very, very thoughtful of him. As he decided to take his kids someplace else, he thought it would be nice to open a public discussion on closing Central High School. the oldest public high school in the state of New Hampshire, an institution that has educated generations of people from Manchester and all over southern New Hampshire. You couldn't cast a stone anywhere in New Hampshire without hitting somebody who has gone to school at Manchester Central. And if you're a Memorial grad or a West High School grad, just sit around long enough and they'll come for you too. It's all wrong. It shouldn't be allowed. The history is very simple. There's no history of people who have been on Manchester School Board or Manchester Board Mayor and Alderman who have proposed increases or properly funding our schools, who have said, well, fine, I'm going to, my purpose is to take my kids and send them someplace else after they've proposed to. They've proposed increases. So the problem is on one side only. There's a problem here of people, or whatever political party they may belong to, but people who refuse to support public schools, but who take their kids and put them in private schools, which is perfectly their right. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. I'm a big supporter of people do whatever they want to do. My problem is with people wanting to take public education away from my kids, my neighbours' kids, and especially from the people with the least options and the least choices and the least money and the least mobility. They're the people they want to take an adequate education away from. And they end up voting with their feet. They can just go to some nice town down the street and be happy to pull up in their SUV with all the other families and drink their coffee with their pinkies in the air, while they can ignore the fact that the city of Manchester is over there and they've now abandoned it. So I don't want to get on that and get after people, but there is a stark contrast with the city of Manchester, with the state budget right now. If the state budget is passed, if Governor Sununu does not veto the state budget, then we will see next year, in 2020, we will see an additional $3.5 million. That's 70 teachers if it was spent on teachers. That's 70 teachers for the city of Manchester. We could take classes where we have no subs and not enough paras, and we have not enough teachers, and we could actually reduce class sizes. We could reintroduce some of the programs that we've eliminated in our schools. We could properly fund technology. We could actually have maybe a gifted and talented class. We could actually have we could have a math curriculum, which we currently don't have. We could have a proper computer studies program. I mean, today, in our computer studies class, we effectively teach kids how to use Microsoft Word and Excel. And I disagree with those who totally deride that and say it's not necessary. I think it is necessary. But it's very low-hanging fruit, because half the kids walking into your classroom today can manipulate spreadsheets, or the idea of using technology is native to them. It's at their fingertips, if you pardon the pun. So it's a very easy lift. They don't need to understand Windows. They don't need to understand using a cursor. They don't need, they're way beyond where kids were just 10 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago, where some concepts were new. And so when you deliver to somebody the idea that, the Windows environment, and this is how Windows work, and you can open a window, you can swap between one and another, you can, that was important information for young people 20 years ago. Today it's like third grade stuff. I don't know if that's literal, but it's, so it's all about introducing. If you want computer science in your classes today, we should be introducing computer science at the level of coding and having people understand what's going on under the hood, so to speak. And so we could do all of those things, or many of them, if we were funded. So when you stop and think about how, there's no magic for this, right? How is this going to happen? You can either continue to side with those who want to keep their foot on the neck of the Manchester schools and on schools more generally, and they squish out from underneath that boot in all kinds of directions about so-called school choice, which really is the resegregation of schools. We've seen it happen in other states where they talk about white flight, and so those who have do, and so. This is an excuse to defund public education. We all know, or we should know, that the real answer to improving educational outcomes will be to fund public school properly, fund it fully, fund it as it deserves to be funded. Under the proposal I'm very I would have done other things, of course, because I'm never going to be happy with anything that doesn't fully fund stuff, but I'm certainly delighted that a majority of the House and Senate had the temerity, were brave enough to actually propose that we fund things properly. Besides, some of the things that are proposed, of course, and funded are the medical family leave. An additional $12 million for the University System of New Hampshire. University System of New Hampshire had the largest cut in the history of the United States of public universities 6 or 7 years ago under Speaker O'Brien. The largest cut in the history of public universities in the history of the United States was here in the state of New Hampshire, and we decimated the state budget. The state portion of the budget. For the last 7 years, it's been flat funded. And so the University System of New Hampshire, and I have to declare I have a son who's at the University System of New Hampshire, so I'd like to declare that if I'm ever being self-serving. But I was saying this before he ever went there and before I knew he might go. So this budget would put $12 million back into the university system. It would fully fund special education. That's the state commitment to special education, fully fund the state commitment to transportation, school transportation, and fully fund the state school building fund. Because as you know, in every state in the United States, if you are a town, a municipality, a school district, and you decide you have a need for a new building and you build that new building, the state steps in and helps you with the cost of that at different levels in different states. But historically, that was always the case, and it was the case up until a few years ago in New Hampshire. But we decided that when we were giving tax breaks to the wealthiest, and when we were reducing the tax on cigarettes and tobacco, so people could get sicker faster, we were giving that money away, and to pay for those giveaways, we decided that we'd eliminate these things like school building programs, and it's caused all kinds of problems across our state. The budget has an additional $14.1 million in it for community colleges. So if you've got a kid, if you're a resident of Manchester and you actually want to fund education, you've got a bill that you can look at right now, and you could call up Governor Sununu and tell him leave the thing alone. It funds mental health. I want to get back to that in a second. But $14.1 million for community college, $12 million for the university system. And I didn't write down the number for the total. I talked about the additional monies from Manchester being $3.5 million this coming year and $16 million the following year. I think it's $146 million across the state in additional education spending. And in the end, we're going to have to do this anyway because, cases are looming. The Constitution, those who believe in law and order, let me attack it from that point of view. Those who would say, we're strict constitutionalists, we've got to obey the Constitution. Well then, let's obey the Constitution. The Constitution of the state of New Hampshire explicitly and clearly demands that the state of New Hampshire fund an adequate education for all its residents. For free, that it funds an adequate education. We have avoided that stipulation in our Constitution for a long time because those who walk around with "I'm a constitutionalist, don't tread on me," etc., what they're really saying is "don't tread on me," and oh, by the way, I don't want to obey the parts of the Constitution that say that I should fund public schools properly because that doesn't suit my outlook on the world. I want to go someplace else before we finish because we run out of time. But it's worth going and looking at the state budget right now and seeing what's there. And if you don't like, ladies and gentlemen, it's perfectly reasonable that there are people listening to this who will say, a bunch of spending, I don't want anything to do with that. You can look where the funding is. The funding for it is coming. One part of it is coming from the elimination of the proposed cuts in the business profits tax and in the enterprise tax. So we've had multiple years. We've been dropping the business profit tax, etc. And this makes no sense whatsoever. And I'll leave it to someone like Ted Herbert to explain the economics, given that's his profession. But profits tax is profits tax. If you and I owned a laundromat, whatever it is, any business. But let's say we owned a laundromat in Manchester, and we had a turnover of $1 million, and we made a profit of $200,000 because I paid myself $100, my partner paid himself $100. We made $200. There's $200,000 left, so that's a total of $400. It cost us $600,000 to run the place. We would pay business profit tax on the $200,000. However, if we repainted it, if we bought new machines, if we increased the pay for our workers from $8 an hour to $10 an hour, then the $200,000 wouldn't be profit. So what the profit is left in the business after we've paid ourselves, it's what's left over. It's what we're going to put in the account so that our grandchildren can have homes in the Cayman Islands. I'm being exaggerating, of course, but to make my point. But the point is, it makes no sense to reduce business profit tax years over year over year. Nobody's asking for it. CMC's not asking for it. BAE Systems putting 800 jobs in the south end of Manchester are not asking for it. The new hotel going up on the Bedford lot are not asking for it. The people building the new hotel opposite the Verizon are not asking for it. Dean Kamen, who with his new iBot for FedEx, is not asking for it. So there is no justification for doing it other than you look at the fact that our schools, for instance, are underfunded. Our mental health is underfunded. You don't want to fund it, and you're quite happy with the fact that I saw something today that caseloads for social workers in the Division of Child and Family Services, or whatever it's called now, is 40. Their caseloads are 45 per person. You know what the national recommended number of cases per worker is? It's 12. That's the national recommended number, that caseworkers should have 12 cases to work on at any given time. In New Hampshire, we've got 45. Now, by the way, the budget proposed in Concord would add 77 people over the next 2 years, paid for by the capital gains tax and by eliminating the reductions in business profit tax and business enterprise taxes. So if we just stopped the cutting, for instance, we'd have $134 million to spend if we just didn't cut. But we want to continue to cut. So anyway, I'd advise you, as we've gone all over the house a little bit there maybe, but the point is there's a stark contrast between those now who say it can't be done and we're just going to keep on reducing services and the poor will suffer and your kids will suffer, and if you've got money, you can go and do it, but the state's not going to help all the rest of the people anymore. You can choose that, or you can choose to do what I consider to be the right thing. Let me go to, before we finish, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to, not even 10 minutes, 7 or 8 minutes. 6 minutes, I'm told. I must be doing old math. So I do want to touch off this issue of the contract for teachers. I think it's appalling that and I mentioned this last week, it's appalling that in the city of Manchester, we have the largest group of public employees in the city who continue to work without getting any pay increase. In other words, they're working for less because inflation last year was 2.6% or something. So they've got 2.6% or 2.16%, whatever the number is, less in real terms to spend than they had the year before. And on top of that, because they're not getting their steps and COLA or their steps, they're even worse off. And we have teachers leaving the district as a result of it. But I want to draw attention to, I know that there's a meeting on, I think it's next week, that the negotiation team from the board of school board has decided to release the materials that they've been negotiating back and forth with the teachers union in Manchester. Now, I have no inside knowledge here, but I have to say, I was just and you know, maybe we can get explanations otherwhere, but I'm appalled that that those representing the teachers couldn't maintain a meeting. I've got an incoming call. Let me take it quickly. Hello, caller. Did we miss? Hello, go ahead. Is there someone there?
No, there's nobody there.
All right, we lost them. Sorry. Try again. I'm sorry, I was a little slow with the finger there. But you know, Maxine Mosley and Sue Hannon are people I know. That's the vice president and president of the MEA. I've no reason to believe that what was reported is not true. And so after waiting from January until a meeting that was well telegraphed and proposed a week and a half or so ago, and at that meeting, because we had to have a mediator, which the teachers union asked for, and the mediator was delayed at some point. So eventually the meeting, after all this time of waiting and with more than 1,000 employees and fellow members waiting, we have a meeting in Manchester, and Sue Hannon is at out of town at a funeral, and you know, God bless her. I don't know why a delegate couldn't have been found, a substitute couldn't. I don't know the practicality of it. The fact that the other negotiator for the teachers, Maxine Mosley, had an MEA meeting to go to at 2:30, so she had to leave at 2:30. Like, what sense does that make? You're in there to negotiate a contract for all the employees in the city of all the teachers in the city of Manchester, but you had an internal meeting to go to at 2:30. What nonsense is that? Close the deal. Let's get the thing done. So I'm a big pro teacher guy. I think teachers are undervalued and overworked and underpaid. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would do what I could to change that tomorrow. But certainly from a public relations point of view, the current union leadership is a disaster. A disaster. And now from the practical actually getting a solution in place, like, if you're losing people like me, ladies and gentlemen, you've pretty much lost, because you have to go a long way to get Jim O'Connell to go after the teachers union in the city of Manchester. I've stood on the line with teachers in the city of Manchester. I don't know what's going on. I'd love to find out what's going on, but I despair. The teachers of Manchester deserve a better deal. They're not going to get one going about it the way their leadership is doing it right now. So I think there's time for a new day, and people should need to step up and do the right thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, Easter weekend is coming up. Enjoy yourselves. Have a great week off next week. Enjoy some time with your kids. Please, I think it's very important. We should all. I'll be doing it and trying to do it to make as much free time as I can. Have a great week, and I will see you all again next Tuesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.